Hi everyone. So now we're going to discuss variables in Python. And at this point we have pretty much discussed the idea of expressions and basically using Python as a calculator. However, Python is obviously a lot more powerful than just using it as a calculator. When we use mathematical expressions in Python, or any expressions for that matter, the next step in our progression here is that we would like to somehow store the results of the output that Python gives us in something, and then use that something later on to operate. So think of it like this. Suppose I have like a box and I put things in the box. And I want to perform or conduct some type of operations on the things that are in the box. And once I'm done doing things, I want to put the results back in the box. So the way that we can think about variables, at least in Python, is similar to how we think about variables in algebra. We think of them as placeholders. Ways to move values around, and then after we have done everything we needed to do with those variables, we then replace the variable name with a number, and then we conduct our normal arithmetic, right? So this is the basic idea. The difference, of course, in Python is that we can store much more than just a simple number in a variable. We can store textual or string literals. We can store what are called data structures like vectors and lists and things of the sort. So Python allows us a pretty great deal of flexibility in what we can use in the variables. Now, coming back around to our coding example here is, let's just use a basic variable, and let's just say that we want to basically put a number in a box which we call x, and we then want to operate, rather than on the number, we want to operate on x, whatever it is that's in x. And basically we're just going to let Python do all the work for us in terms of the operations. So the first step in using variables is always doing what's called declaring and assigning the variable, and we do this with a very simple procedure. We do this with a variable name, similar to how we do this in regular algebra, an equal sign, and then whatever it is we're going to put in that variable on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Unlike in algebra, you can't just work with equations left and right. When we work with variables in Python, it always follows the same convention. The variable name on the left, the equal sign, and whatever it is we're storing in that variable. So for example, suppose we wanted to store the number 5 in the variable x. We would then type x equal sign 5. And what this will do is put the value 5 in the variable x. So if you do your Alt-Shift-E to run that, Python would run that. Now we can basically see what's in a variable by asking Python what's in it, just by simply typing the variable name. Alt-Control-E, and when you run that, Python says, oh, the number 5 is stored in here. Now, if you try to do this with a variable that has not been assigned, like let's say the variable y, okay, well, in our case, we did assign y before, so let me take a step back and maybe try z. Okay, it's going to yell at you, and it's going to say, hey, listen, you didn't use the variable z. Nothing's in it. You're free to use it, but whatever you're trying to do with this, you haven't assigned it a value. So naturally, of course, let's assign it a value. And so when we do that, let's say z equals 4. Now if we go back to ask, hey, Python, what's in z? It will, of course, say 4, right? We can do math with variables. So for example, you could do something like x plus 5. If you remember, the number 5 is stored in x, so therefore 5 plus 5 is 10, as you can see. x minus 1, which we should get 4 from that, as you can see. X divided by 2, which, let's see, we get 2. Remember, we didn't divide this by what's called a floating point. If we did do that, now we get 2.5, as we properly should. Okay. Oops. And if you do x times 1.5, you'll do Alt-Shift-D, 7.5. So as you can see, we have different mathematical operations that we can perform on the variables. And you're not just limited to just working with one variable, you can work with others. So if you recall, we did assign the variable z to a number and the variable x to a number. So work with variables and variables using basic arithmetic. So we could do something like x plus z, which get 9, 5 plus 4, right? X over z, 1, because they're, remember, it drops the fraction, or it drops the decimal portion of it, if you recall that. X times x times z, which we should get 20, we get 20, right? And so on and so forth. So you get the point, right? But by the way, you're not just restricted to assigning numbers to variables. You could assign the results of computation to variables. So for example, I could say, let the variable m, by the way, check what's in m, yells at you, nothing. So that's kind of a good thing, right? M is equal to x times, x times z plus 2 minus 5 times x. I don't know, something crazy like that. And if you do that, you notice you don't get an output, but if you type in the letter m, of course, you'll get the output, which in this case it's telling us is -3. I'll have you check the math on that with the values that have been assigned to x and z respectively. I think x was set to 5 and z was set equal to 4. So by all means, please check the arithmetic, see if Python did it correctly, which most likely it did. By the way, Python abides by the order of operation, PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. If you don't remember that, please review it. It is in the textbook. I'm not going to review it here, but the key point to recall is that when you write equations, you should certainly emphasize certain portions of it in parentheses. So if you intend to do something along the lines of, I don't know, 5 plus 6 times 7, right? And you intend to first add the 5 and the 6 and then multiply by the 7, this is not actually correct. Instead, what you want to do is emphasize the 5 plus the 6 in parentheses, and then multiply by 7, and you will get your correct result. So when you're working with equations, however you want Python to compute the equation, make sure you emphasize this with parentheses. Otherwise, Python just immediately assumes you want to do PEMDAS from left to right recursively. So don't get that confused. It's always good to be safe by emphasizing the parentheses to ensure that Python is properly computing whatever it is you need to compute. Good rule of thumb is when you have equations with like fractions and things and exponents and all the like, it's good to emphasize those portions of the equations with surrounding parentheses. These are just simple, basic best practices in everyday programming. By the way, we can gather input from a user just simply by using the input function, and we'll get more into functions in the next video. But the way a function basically works in Python is similar to how it works in Excel. You first use the name of the function, you use an open parentheses, you give it the function a collection of inputs separated by commas if it's more than one input, and then you end it with a parentheses. In this case, for the input function, we could just say let x equals input open close. And then what we can do is just simply output the input. So let's run that, right? And when we run that, you'll notice here it gives you a question mark. And what that just simply means is that the Python console is asking the user to input something. So I'm going to input 10 here. And lo and behold, let's see, let's check. It did indeed work. Okay, now you could have used, I should say, the print function here on X, and this probably would have worked better. And so if you do, let's say, 5, notice that it outputs the 5. And that's because we used the print function. So the input function allows us to provide Python an input. An example from your book is to convert, for example, Fahrenheit to Celsius. And basically, first you provide the temperature by gathering an input, and then you do the conversion, which is the Celsius, and this is equal to 5.0 over 9.0 times whatever the temperature is minus 30 degrees. And what we can then do is just print the Celsius. And when you do this, okay, let's say it is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that in Celsius? It is saying 15.56 roughly, or 15.5556 roughly degrees Celsius. Okay, so that's a nice little conversion that the book has to illustrate the use of variables. The point being, to take away from this video, is that variables help us move things around quite easily. They help us store information and help us very easily access that information. Now that we have gone through a very basic overview of the use of variables, we're going to move to the use of functions, which is a very, very important aspect to learn here when it comes to Python.